illegal search! That's an illegal search! You know it is! That's an illegal search! Get off me! Get off me! That's an illegal search! Get off me! You know that's illegal! Let go of my hands!
Adam, you're under arrest.
For what?
For more than a year, her family waited for answers. They buried their grief under silence, while the man they believed was responsible walked free, still a husband in the eyes of the law, still entitled to make decisions over her body, her memory, and her death. Caitlin Tracy was 36 years old, a daughter, a sister, a woman whose family says she lived in fear inside her own marriage. In October of 2024, Caitlin's body was found at the bottom of a stairwell in a luxury Chicago high-rise. At first, it was treated as a mysterious fall, but behind closed doors, investigators were already uncovering a far darker story, one filled with domestic violence, deleted messages, lies, and a man who claimed he wasn't even in town. Now, more than a year later, that man, Chicago attorney Adam Beckerink, has been formally charged with her murder.
It was a winter. What were we dispatched to? It was not even a domestic. I showed up and she was bleeding all over her face, and he had hit her good.
Tonight, we break down what police say really happened, why this case took so long to reach charges, and why Caitlin's family believes the truth was there from the very beginning. This is the case of Caitlin Tracy, and this is what prosecutors say her husband tried to hide. In the early hours of a fall morning in Chicago, a luxury high-rise in the South Loop became the center of a death investigation that would take more than a year to unravel. Inside the building's stairwell, far from public view, the body of a 36-year-old woman was discovered at the bottom of multiple flights of stairs. She had suffered catastrophic injuries. There were no witnesses, no immediate explanation, just a silent, brutal scene inside a place where residents believed they were safe. Her name was Caitlin Tracy. At first glance, authorities treated the case as a suspicious fall. But for Caitlin's family, the circumstances made no sense from the very beginning. They did not see an accident. They saw a pattern, one that had followed Caitlin for years. A pattern of fear, a pattern of violence, a pattern of control. Caitlin was married to a Chicago attorney, Adam Beckerink. To the outside world, their life appeared polished, successful careers, upscale living, and mobility between states. But court filings and police records would later reveal a far different reality behind closed doors. By the time Caitlin was found dead in October of 2024, there was already a documented history of domestic violence in the marriage, and that history would become impossible to ignore. When police first arrived at the condo building, they began the standard procedures, securing the scene, documenting the stairwell, and trying to reconstruct how a fall of that magnitude could have occurred. The stairwell itself was enclosed, utilitarian, and not a place someone would casually enter unless they intended to use it. Investigators quickly learned that Caitlin had been reported missing days earlier. The missing person report had been filed by her husband. According to his statement, Caitlin had disappeared while he was out of town. He claimed he was not in Chicago when she went missing, and that he had no idea where she could be. But surveillance footage told a different story. Video evidence from the condo building showed Adam Beckerink inside the residence on the very day before Caitlin was reported missing. Not only was he present, he was seen with her. That contradiction immediately raised alarms. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered another troubling detail. Text messages between Caitlin and Adam had been deleted from both of their phones. When questioned about the missing messages, Adam could not provide a clear explanation. In cases involving intimate partner violence, deleted communications are rarely accidental. Investigators also reviewed older footage and records. In the days leading up to Caitlin's disappearance, she appeared on video with visible injuries to her face. Those injuries were not consistent with a simple accident. They were consistent with assault. This discovery shifted the investigation from suspicious death to something far more serious. Police began re-examining everything, especially Adam Beckerink's prior interactions with law enforcement. Earlier in 2024, months before Caitlin's death, police in New Buffalo, Michigan responded to a domestic violence call involving the couple. Body-worn camera footage captured a chaotic scene. Caitlin had attempted to call 911. Adam interfered with that call. He was agitated, aggressive, confrontational with officers. That incident resulted in criminal charges. Adam Beckerink was eventually sentenced to 93 days in jail for domestic violence and interference with an emergency call. What made this detail especially disturbing was the timing. While investigators investigators in Chicago were quietly building a homicide case around Caitlin's death, Adam was still being processed through the legal system for abusing her while she was alive. Caitlin never got the chance to testify in that case. As Chicago detectives continued their investigation, Caitlin's family was fighting a different battle, one that revealed just how deeply they believed Adam was responsible for her death. As Caitlin's husband, Adam was her legal next of kin. After her death, he requested that her body be cremated. Her parents objected immediately. They went to court, arguing that their daughter had been a victim of domestic violence and that her husband was the prime suspect in her death. They believed cremation would destroy critical evidence and permanently silence the truth. They also wanted a traditional Catholic funeral for Caitlin, a burial that honored her faith and allowed the family to grieve properly. The court sided with Caitlin's parents. It was an extraordinary decision, and one that underscored how serious the allegations already were, even before formal murder charges were filed.
The defendant stalked her, brutalized her, terrorized her, physically hurt her, and psychologically isolated her.
And one that underscored how serious the allegations already were, even before formal murder charges were filed. Behind the scenes, Chicago homicide detectives continued working the case. These investigations move slowly by necessity. Evidence must be tested, timelines verified, statements cross-checked, surveillance analyzed frame by frame. This was not a case built on a single piece of proof.
Her family continues to believe in the strength of the legal system and remains confident.
It was built on contradictions, on lies about being out of town, on deleted messages, on a documented history of violence, on physical injuries seen before death, on a fall that did not align with accident. Eventually, police arrested Adam Beckerink, not for murder, but for filing a false missing person report. Even then, the case was not ready. Investigators needed more, and they waited. Nearly a year passed. Then, in a moment that Caitlin's family had both feared and hoped for, Chicago police announced they would formally charge Adam Beckerink with murder. According to the arrest warrant, investigators concluded that Caitlin had been thrown down the stairwell from the 24th floor, falling approximately 29 stories. The language was direct. There was no ambiguity. This was not a fall. It was an act of violence. Adam Beckerink was extradited from Michigan, where he had just completed his jail sentence for domestic violence, and transported back to Chicago. He was booked into the Cook County Jail and held without bond. For Caitlin's family, the announcement did not bring relief, only confirmation. They had believed this outcome from the very beginning, but now the case was no longer about suspicion, it was about proof. And as the legal process began, one question loomed over everything. What really happened in that stairwell, and what did it take nearly a year for the truth to come out? That answer would emerge piece by piece, inside a courtroom where the past could no longer be erased. Once Caitlin Tracy's death was no longer viewed as an accident, the investigation changed in tone and urgency. Chicago homicide detectives approached the case the way they do all suspected intimate partner killings, by rebuilding the final days of the victim's life in precise detail. They began with the stairwell. The stairwell in the South Loop condo building was not a common area where residents lingered. It was enclosed, functional, and typically used only for emergencies or quick exits. There was no reason for Caitlin to be there unless she was trying to leave quickly or was forced into it. Medical examiners determined that Caitlin suffered fatal injuries consistent with a fall from a significant height, but investigators needed to determine how she ended up falling. Accidental slips in stairwells usually leave telltale patterns, defensive injuries, grip marks, or indications of loss of balance. What they found instead suggested force. Detectives focused on the level where they believed the fall began, the 24th floor. That determination was not random. It was based on injury patterns, impact analysis, and stairwell geometry. From that height, the fall would have been unsurvivable. The next question was presence. Adam Beckerink had told police he was out of town when Caitlin disappeared, but building surveillance footage contradicted him. Cameras placed in hallways and elevators showed Adam inside the residence on the day before Caitlin was reported missing. That lie mattered. In homicide investigations, false alibis are often more revealing than confessions. People lie when the truth places them at the scene, and in this case, Adam's lie did exactly that. Detectives then turned to digital evidence. Adam allowed police to view his phone and Caitlin's phone. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual, but forensic analysis revealed large portions of their message history had been deleted on both devices. According to police, Adam could not explain why the messages were gone. Deleted messages between spouses in a healthy relationship raise questions. Deleted messages during a missing person investigation raise alarms. Investigators also reviewed older video footage showing Caitlin with visible facial injuries shortly before her death. These images were critical. They demonstrated not only recent violence, but escalation, an important factor in domestic homicide cases. Statistics show that visible injuries, attempts to leave, and interference with emergency calls often precede lethal violence. Caitlin's case contained all three. The Michigan incident became a cornerstone of the Chicago investigation. Earlier in 2024, police in New Buffalo, Michigan responded to Caitlin's home after she attempted to call 911. Body-worn camera footage captured Adam Beckerink agitated, combative, and interfering with officers. Caitlin was visibly injured. That case resulted in Adam's conviction for domestic violence and interfering with an emergency call. He was sentenced to 93 days in jail. For Chicago detectives, that conviction established a documented pattern of abuse. It showed Adam was willing to use force, willing to prevent Caitlin from seeking help, and willing to confront law enforcement. Most importantly, it showed Caitlin was trying to protect herself. Investigators also learned that Caitlin had attempted to obtain legal protection from Adam in the past. Court filings revealed her family's concern that she was in danger long before her death. These were not after-the-fact accusations. They were warnings that existed while Caitlin was alive. As the case developed, Adam was briefly taken into custody, not for murder, but for filing a false missing person report. At that time, detectives did not yet have enough forensic evidence to hold him on homicide charges. That decision frustrated Caitlin's family. But homicide cases rarely move quickly. Evidence must be tested, DNA must be processed, digital records must be authenticated. Prosecutors will not file charges until they believe the case can survive trial. Behind the scenes, investigators were building that case. One of the most significant developments came from DNA analysis. Prosecutors later revealed that Adam's DNA was found on the stairwell door handle near where they believed the fall began. Caitlin's DNA was not. The defense would later argue that this absence was meaningful, that Caitlin may not have touched the door. Prosecutors countered that this detail actually supported their theory, that Caitlin did not enter the stairwell voluntarily. Instead, they argued she was forced. Another critical factor was Adam's behavior after Caitlin's death. When he was initially questioned, one of his first statements was reportedly, "Is she alive? Is she okay?" For detectives, that question stood out. Caitlin's body had already been found. Her injuries were catastrophic. The question suggested either denial or knowledge inconsistent with the facts he had been told. As months passed, investigators continued to collect and organize evidence. They worked with prosecutors from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, reviewing every detail for weaknesses. They anticipated the defense strategy: doubt, alternative explanations, and claims of accidental death. To counter that, the state needed more than suspicion. They needed proof of intent. Prosecutors believed intent could be shown through pattern and escalation, the history of violence, the attempt to silence Caitlin by interfering with her 911 call, the deleted messages, the false alibi, the physical evidence, and finally, the nature of the fall itself. By the time Adam Beckerink finished serving his Michigan sentence, Chicago authorities were ready. He was extradited from Michigan and returned to Chicago in custody. A judge denied bail after a lengthy hearing, citing the seriousness of the charge and the risk he posed. For Caitlin's family, the moment was devastating, but validating. They had said from the beginning that this was not an accident. Now the legal system was saying it too. But a murder charge is not a conviction. The next phase would test everything investigators had built. Defense attorneys would challenge every assumption. Every piece of evidence would be scrutinized. And the question that haunted Caitlin's family would finally be asked in open court: did Adam Beckerink kill his wife? That answer would not come quickly. But the case was finally moving toward the truth. When Adam Beckerink was brought back to Chicago in custody, the case entered its most consequential phase. The investigation was no longer unfolding quietly behind closed doors. It was now moving into a courtroom where every claim would be challenged, every detail dissected, and every assumption tested. At the initial detention hearing, prosecutors made their position clear. This was not a tragic accident. This was not a fall brought on by misstep or imbalance. According to the state, Caitlin Tracy's death was the final act in a pattern of domestic violence that had escalated over time. They argued that Adam Beckerink was both a danger to the community and a serious flight risk. He had financial means, professional connections, and a demonstrated willingness to lie to law enforcement. The judge agreed, denying bail and ordering that Beckerink remain in the Cook County Jail as the case moved forward. For Caitlin's family, that decision mattered. It meant the man they believed had killed their daughter would not walk free while awaiting trial. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors began laying the groundwork for what they say happened during Caitlin's final hours. Their theory was methodical. They believe Caitlin and Adam were together inside the condo on the night of October 24, 2024. Surveillance footage places Adam in the residence. Digital evidence contradicts his claim that he was out of town. There is no indication that Caitlin was planning to leave voluntarily or that she had reason to enter the stairwell on her own. What prosecutors believe happened next is rooted in both forensic analysis and behavioral evidence. According to the state, an argument occurred. This was not unusual in the relationship. Police records and court filings show repeated incidents of conflict and violence. Caitlin had been injured before. She had tried to call for help before. She had been prevented from doing so before. This time, prosecutors say, the violence escalated beyond control. They believe Caitlin was forced into the stairwell on the 24th floor. The enclosed nature of the space, combined with the lack of her DNA on the door handle, supports the state's argument that she did not enter willingly. From there, they allege, Adam Beckerink pushed her. The fall was catastrophic. Medical examiners concluded that Caitlin's injuries were consistent with a fall from extreme height. There were no signs of survival after impact. Death would have been instantaneous or nearly so. The defense, however, has signaled a very different narrative. Beckerink's attorneys have suggested that Caitlin may have acted on her own, that she could have fallen accidentally or even jumped. They have pointed to the absence of her DNA on the stairwell door handle as potential support for that claim. But prosecutors counter that argument aggressively. They argue that suicide or accident does not align with Caitlin's behavior, her plans, or her documented efforts to escape an abusive relationship. Friends and family members have stated that Caitlin was trying to move forward with her life, not end it. More importantly, prosecutors argue that suicide theories are often raised in domestic violence homicides when evidence of abuse exists, but accountability is difficult to accept. They also emphasize Adam's behavior after Caitlin's death. He filed a missing person report days after she was last seen, despite surveillance placing him with her. He claimed ignorance while evidence mounted. Messages were deleted. Details were withheld. Statements changed. To prosecutors, these actions demonstrate consciousness of guilt. During hearings, the court also reviewed Adam Beckerink's prior conviction in Michigan. The body-worn camera footage from that incident painted a picture of volatility, entitlement, and control. He interfered with Caitlin's attempt to call 911. He argued with officers. He asserted his authority as an attorney while resisting arrest. That footage, prosecutors say, matters. It shows how Adam behaved when confronted. It shows how Caitlin behaved when she was afraid. And it shows what the relationship looked like when no one was watching. Defense attorneys have attempted to frame that incident as isolated, arguing that couples fight and that past misconduct does not prove murder. Legally, they are correct. Prior acts alone do not equal guilt. But in domestic homicide cases, prosecutors are allowed to show pattern, and pattern is exactly what the state intends to prove. Experts are expected to testify about escalation in abusive relationships, about how interference with emergency calls is one of the strongest predictors of future lethal violence, about how victims often remain with their abusers not because they want to, but because leaving is dangerous. Caitlin's family has said she lived in fear. They have said she was trying to protect herself. They have said they believe she was killed because she was losing her abuser's control. As pretrial motions continue, the case is expected to move slowly. Defense attorneys have requested extensive discovery. Prosecutors are preparing for a battle over digital evidence, surveillance interpretation, and forensic conclusions. This will not be a quick trial. Legal experts say it could take up to 2 years before a jury hears the case in full. During that time, Beckerink will remain in custody, his freedom replaced by the same concrete walls that now hold the weight of the allegations against him. For Caitlin's family, the waiting is agonizing, but familiar. They waited for answers when her death was first reported as a fall. They waited while the investigation unfolded quietly. They waited as the man they believed responsible served time for abusing her while she lay buried. Now they wait again, but this time the case is moving toward judgment, and the question that will ultimately define everything is one that cannot be softened or avoided. Was Caitlin Tracy pushed to her death by the man who vowed to love her? The courtroom will decide. As the case against Adam Beckerink moves forward, one thing has become unavoidable. Caitlin Tracy's death can no longer be explained away as an accident. What once appeared to be a tragic fall has now been reframed by prosecutors as the final and most violent chapter of a relationship defined by control and abuse. In court, the stakes are clear. The state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Caitlin did not fall, that she was pushed. The defense needs only to introduce doubt. That tension will define every motion, every witness, and every piece of evidence presented. Prosecutors are expected to rely heavily on pattern and escalation. Domestic violence experts will likely testify that lethal outcomes are rarely sudden. They are often preceded by warning signs, interference with emergency calls, visible injuries, isolation, and increasing control. Caitlin's case contained all of them. The Michigan incident looms large. It is not simply a prior conviction. It is a window into the dynamic of the marriage. Body-worn camera footage captured Adam Beckerink angry, combative, and dismissive of law enforcement while Caitlin appeared injured and frightened. Prosecutors argue that moment shows exactly how he responded when authority intervened, and how far he was willing to go to maintain control. Defense attorneys are expected to push back aggressively. They may argue that prior abuse does not equal murder. They may point to the lack of eyewitnesses. They may attempt to frame Caitlin's death as an accident or a personal decision. They will scrutinize forensic conclusions and challenge the interpretation of surveillance footage. This is how trials unfold, but the prosecution believes the evidence tells a coherent story. They point to the lie about being out of town, to deleted messages on both phones, to Caitlin's visible injuries before her death, to DNA found on the stairwell door handle, to a fall location that makes little sense without force. Each detail alone might be questioned. Together, prosecutors argue they form a narrative that cannot be ignored. For Caitlin's family, the courtroom process is both necessary and painful. Every hearing reopens wounds. Every legal argument revisits the worst moments of her life, but they continue to show up, determined that Caitlin's story will be told fully, not softened, not erased. They have spoken publicly about who Caitlin was beyond the headlines: a daughter, a sister, a woman of faith, someone who deserves safety in her own home. They have also spoken openly about fear they believe Caitlin lived with daily, fear that escalated as she tried to assert independence, fear that in their view ultimately cost her life. In domestic homicide cases, timing matters. Many victims are killed shortly after attempting to leave or regain control over their lives. Prosecutors are expected to argue that Caitlin was reaching that point, that the balance of power was shifting, and when abusers lose control, violence often escalates. The judge's decision to deny bail reflected that concern. The court cited the seriousness of the charge, the strength of the evidence presented so far, and Beckerink's access to resources that could enable flight. Until trial, he remains in the Cook County Jail. Legal experts caution that the road ahead will be long. Murder trials rarely move quickly, especially when the defendant has strong legal representation. Motions will be filed. Evidence will be challenged. Appeals may follow, regardless of the outcome. But the direction of the case is clear. This is no longer about suspicion. It is about accountability. Beyond the courtroom, Caitlin's death has sparked broader conversations about how domestic violence is handled, about how long patterns of abuse are overlooked, and about how easily victims' voices can be minimized until it is too late. Advocates emphasize that domestic violence does not always look dramatic from the outside. It can exist quietly, hidden behind professional success and polished appearances. Caitlin's case is a reminder that abuse does not discriminate and that its consequences can be fatal. For the public, the case forces an uncomfortable reckoning. How many warning signs were visible? How many chances were there to intervene? And how often do similar stories end without answers? Caitlin's family believes one thing firmly, that the truth was there all along. It took time for investigators to gather enough evidence to act. It took persistence from those who refused to accept an accident explanation. And it took nearly a year for the legal system to catch up with what they say they already knew. Now, the truth will be tested under oath. The courtroom will decide Adam Beckerink's fate, but regardless of the verdict, Caitlin Tracy's story has already left a mark. It has exposed how domestic violence can escalate behind closed doors, how lies can delay justice, and how silence can be dangerous. Her family has said they will continue to speak her name. They will continue to tell her story. They will continue to demand accountability because Caitlin was more than the way she died, and because no one should have to fight this hard to be believed after they are already gone. This case is not just about a fall in a stairwell. It is about what happens when abuse is ignored, minimized, or dismissed, and it is about making sure the truth is never buried with the victim.